Son-in-law told his golf buddies I was a drain on my daughter's future. He said it at Thanksgiving dinner, loud enough for me to hear from the kitchen where I was washing dishes, because he'd made a comment earlier about how some people just don't know when they've overstayed their welcome. I'm Hector Baines, 67 years old, and I'd spent the last 9 years letting my daughter believe I was surviving on a part-time handyman gig, and whatever I could scrape together from odd jobs around Knoxville. What my daughter Melissa didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the little repair shop I'd mentioned once at Christmas had turned into Baines Structural Solutions, a civil engineering and infrastructure consulting firm with contracts in 6 states, 1,800 employees, an annual revenue that would make her husband's law firm look like a lemonade stand. When they sat me down last February to explain why it made financial sense for me to liquidate my farmhouse and move into assisted living, I didn't say a word. I just nodded and started making phone calls. If you're watching this, drop a comment and tell me where you're from. Because this story is about what happens when the people who should love you most decide to love your assets instead. Most people see exactly what my son-in-law Garrett sees when he looks at me. A man in his late 60s who drives a 2007 Chevy Silverado with a cracked dashboard and a missing hubcap on the rear left wheel. A man who wears the same Carhartt jacket he's owned since 2011 and brings a Walmart rotisserie chicken to every family gathering because he says it travels well. A man who, according to Garrett, quote, has no concept of what his property is actually worth in this market. Garrett Walsh, 36 years old. Partner at Walsh and Dunmore Family Law in Nashville. He bills $450 an hour and has never once in 11 years of marriage to my daughter asked me a single question about my work. Not one. My daughter Melissa is 39. Sharp woman. Was, anyway, before Garrett got his hands on her perspective. She used to call me every Sunday. Used to drive up to Knoxville on her own just to sit on the porch and talk. Then she met Garrett at a conference in Atlanta, and inside of 2 years, she'd stopped coming alone, stopped calling as much, started prefacing every sentence about me with Garrett thinks and Garrett says. The first sign came about 14 months ago. Garrett started referring to my property as the Baines acreage in conversations at the dinner table. Not my house, not Dad's place. The acreage, like it was already a line item on a spreadsheet somewhere. Then it became the Maryville Road parcel, then just the land like I'd already signed off and moved on. The second sign came when Garrett's mother, a woman named Constance who has never worked a day that wasn't funded by her late husband's insurance payout, started joining our family dinners. She'd walk through my house, the way people walk through an open house, touching countertops, peering into closets, asking about the roof age. At Easter, she pulled Melissa aside in my kitchen, and I heard her say, clear as anything, that acreage like this doesn't sit on the market long, and that waiting too long is how families lose generational wealth. Generational wealth. In a house I'd built by hand over 2 years with money I'd earned cleaning, commercial buildings at 4 in the morning before I had anything to my name. The real breaking point was a Sunday afternoon in January. Garrett invited his father-in-law, his father, not mine, a man named Prescott who had sold a chain of car dealerships in Memphis for $11 million and spent the subsequent decade reminding everyone of it. Prescott Walsh sat down in my living room like a man who'd already closed the deal. He looked at my bookshelves, my worn-out couch, the wood stove I'd installed myself in 1999, and he shook his head slowly, the way doctors do before they say something you don't want to hear. Hector, he said, a man your age shouldn't be heating a house this size with wood. That's a fire risk and a physical burden. You know what a property like this could do for Melissa and Garrett's portfolio? I told him I was fine. Fine isn't the point, Constance said from the kitchen, where she'd been poking around without asking. The point is what makes sense going forward. Melissa sat across from me with her hands folded and her eyes on the floor. She didn't say anything. That was the moment I understood this had been discussed before I arrived. Garrett leaned forward. What we're proposing isn't complicated. You sign the property over to Melissa. It stays in the family. We build something modern, something that makes sense for the land's actual value. You'd be well taken care of. There's a retirement community in Brentwood. Very nice. Independent living, not nursing home stuff. They have a woodworking shop. He paused. You like building things. I like building things. In my own house. And where would I go in the meantime, I asked. And where would I go in the meantime, I asked. They'd rehearsed this part too. Constance had a brochure ready, Sycamore Ridge Senior Living, starting at $1,100 a month for a studio. Very clean, she said. Very safe. Prescott leaned back in my chair, the one I'd reupholstered 3 times, and said, Hector, that land is worth close to $800,000 right now. You're sitting on equity that's just evaporating while you chop wood and pay property taxes on a house too big for one person. I asked if he'd looked into my finances. We have a general picture, Garrett said carefully. A general picture, based, I was sure, on what they could see. The truck, the jacket, the Walmart chicken. I said I'd think about it. 3 days later the email arrived. 7:22 in the morning. Subject line, next steps on the Maryville Road property. Garrett had C.C. Prescott, Constance, and someone named Fletcher Dunmore, his law partner. The email was 3 pages long. It outlined a voluntary transfer agreement by which I would deed the property to Melissa immediately, retain the right to occupy a single bedroom for up to 12 months while I transitioned, and receive a one-time payment of $60,000, a family courtesy. Garrett called it, to cover my moving costs in first year at Sycamore Ridge. $60,000 for $800,000 worth of land. The bedroom that used to be Melissa's when she visited. For 12 months. I called Melissa directly, not Garrett. Her. Dad, we've talked about this a lot. Garrett really does know property law better than most people. It's my house, Mel. I know, Dad. Her voice had that careful quality, the one people use when they've already decided and just need the other person to catch up. But you're 67. You live alone. That's a lot of property for one person to manage. I manage it fine. You drive a truck that's older than my marriage. I thought about telling her about the truck I keep in the warehouse in Knoxville. A 2023 Ram 1500. I drive it on Tuesdays when I go to the office. I keep the Silverado for everything else because the Silverado is the truth of where I came from, and I've never been ashamed of that. Instead, I said I'd call her back. That evening, I sat on my back porch, the same porch where I'd taught Melissa to identify constellations when she was 9, where she'd cried on my shoulder the night before her first wedding that didn't work out, where we'd sat in silence together the morning her mother was buried, and I made 4 phone calls. First call, my attorney, a woman named Pauline Ostrander, who has handled every piece of my business and legal life for 16 years. She picked up on the second ring. Pauline, I need an asset protection trust restructured by Friday. My son-in-law is trying to take my house. She didn't ask me to repeat it. Tell me everything. I did. She was quiet for a moment after I finished. What outcome are you looking for, Hector? I want it bulletproof. They have a lawyer in the family. Make sure there's no daylight. Done. What else? I'll call you back about what else. Second call. My CFO at Bain Structural Solutions, a man named Timothy Park, who has been with the company for 11 years and doesn't rattle easily. Timothy, I need a full report on any business or financial connection between this firm and anything touching the Walsh family. Garrett Walsh, Prescott Walsh, Walsh and Dunmore Law, anything. He called me back in 20 minutes. Hector, Walsh and Dunmore represents the legal interests of the Hargrove Development Group out of Nashville. Hargrove has been a subcontracted partner on the Clarksville Bridge renovation we've been managing for the state. That's a $4.6 million contract over 30 months. Garrett Walsh personally drafted the subcontractor agreement on Hargrove's side. I asked if he knew this. The filing is public record. Whether he made the connection to you personally, I don't know. Terminate Hargrove subcontract. Site performance concerns. We have enough documentation from the last site review. That'll delay the Clarksville timeline. Reroute to Caldwell Engineering. They've been wanting in on state work for 2 years. Now they're in. Understood. Third call. My operations director, a woman I've worked with for 14 years named Winifred Cross, who runs the day-to-day of our Tennessee and Kentucky divisions. Win, I need you to pull any connection between this company and Prescott Walsh's former dealership group or any entity he's currently connected to. She called back in 30 minutes. He's a silent equity partner in Riverfront Properties, LLC, a commercial real estate holding group. We have a facilities management contract with 2 buildings they own in Nashville. Annual value around $280,000. End both contracts. Give them 30 days notice and professional referrals. I want nothing on paper that looks retaliatory. You sure, Hector? That's clean recurring revenue, I'm sure. Fourth call was to my daughter. I didn't say anything important. I just asked her how the kids were, whether little Devin was over his ear infection, whether she'd tried the new brisket place on Charlotte Avenue that she'd mentioned wanting to try. I listened to her talk for 20 minutes. She sounded normal. She sounded like my daughter. I told her I loved her and I'd see her Sunday at the family dinner Constance had organized. The one I knew was meant to be the closing ceremony for everything they'd already decided. Constance Walsh threw dinner parties the way generals plan campaigns. 40 people at a private room she'd booked at a restaurant in Brentwood, the kind of place where the parking valets assume you have a second home and the menu doesn't list prices. It was officially a birthday celebration for Prescott's 68th. But I'd been to enough of these to know when a dinner party is actually a press conference. I drove my Silverado, parked it between two Mercedes in the valet lot. The attendant looked at me like I'd made a wrong turn. Garrett met me at the entrance in a suit that probably cost more than my first car. Hector, good, you made it. We've got you at the family table. Inside, the room smelled like money trying to smell like warmth. Prescott held court near the bar with 3 men in their 60s who had the particular ease of people who've never had to read a bill carefully. Constance circulated with the precision of someone who has memorized every name and net worth in the room. Melissa stood near the window, looking beautiful and tired, the way she'd looked the last few years whenever Garrett was working a room. Prescott waved me over immediately. He was generous in public. I'll give him that. Hector, come here. I want you to meet some people. He put a hand on my shoulder and steered me toward his circle. Everyone, this is Melissa's father, Hector. Good man. Salt of the earth. He said it the way people say salt of the earth when they mean harmless. Hector. This is Douglas Fairmont. He's in commercial development. Boyd Richter, private equity. And this is Lyle Cummings. He runs one of the largest residential construction groups in Middle Tennessee. They shook my hand. Lyle Cummings held it a half-second longer than necessary and looked at me with a flicker of something I couldn't read. I'd find out why later. So what line of work were you in, Hector? Boyd asked. Engineering and infrastructure consulting. Still in it, actually. Prescott chuckled. Hector ran a little repair operation for years. Good with his hands. Weren't you, Hector? Still am. Constance appeared with wine glasses and distributed them to everyone except me. Hector prefers to keep it simple, don't you? She said to the group, not to me, while handing me a glass of water. Very budget conscious. I admire that in a person. The conversation moved around me. The men discussed a new mixed-use development going up along the Cumberland, tax increment financing on a Williamson County project, a resort development outside Chattanooga that Boyd's group was looking at. When Lyle mentioned he was partnering with a structural firm on a major I-24 overpass rehabilitation project being managed out of Knoxville, I said nothing. Halfway through the appetizers, Constance tapped her glass. The room went quiet. Before Prescott opens his gifts, Richard and I. She laughed and corrected herself. Prescott and I want to make a little announcement. As some of you know, our Melissa and her wonderful Garrett have been working hard to build the kind of life that makes a mother proud. And as part of that next chapter, we're thrilled to share that they've secured the land for their forever home. Murmurs of delight around the room. A beautiful property in Maryville Road, Knoxville. Historic land. Wonderful bones. It's been in the Baines family for decades, and we're so grateful that Hector has chosen to pass it forward to the next generation. 40 people looked at me and started clapping. Garrett stood up with his wine glass. Dad, we want to acknowledge publicly what you're doing for our family. We know it's a big transition, and we're committed to making it as smooth as possible. Sycamore Ridge has a great community. Mel's already talked to the director. Melissa's eyes met mine. Something moved across her face. Not guilt exactly, but something close enough. They have a workshop, Constance added brightly. Hector, you'll be able to keep building things, just on a smaller scale. Laughter around the room. Prescott raised his glass. To Hector. For doing the right thing by his family. To Hector. The room echoed. I stayed seated. Garrett noticed. Dad? You want to say anything? I looked around the room. 40 people who had spent the evening discussing the disposal of my life while I ate their appetizers and drank their water. I have a question, I said. Not loud. The room adjusted. Lyle, I said, looking at Cummings, who had gone slightly still. You mentioned an overpass rehabilitation project on I-24, structural management out of Knoxville. He nodded slowly. Do you know the name of the firm managing that contract? He knew. I could see it on his face before he said it. Bain Structural Solutions. Garrett frowned. Dad, what is this? It's a question. Do you know who owns Bain Structural Solutions, Garrett? His face was careful. That's a major infrastructure firm. They do federal work. They do federal work. They do. Who owns it? Silence. I do, I said. Founded it in 2004. Still the majority owner and acting CEO. Current workforce is just under 1,800 people across Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, West Virginia, Georgia, and the Carolinas. Annual contract revenue last year was $93 million. The room did not make a sound. Prescott set down his wineglass. I want to be clear about something, I continued. I've never once, in 11 years of being Garrett's father-in-law, been asked what I do for work. Not once. I have been offered water instead of wine because the assumption was that I couldn't afford wine. I have been pointed toward a studio apartment at $1,100 a month because the assumption was that I couldn't do math. I have been handed a transfer agreement for my own home, written by my son-in-law's law partner, offering me $60,000 for property worth 14 times that, so that my daughter could build her forever home on land I built with money I earned before she was married. Garrett stood up. Hector, let's take this outside. We'll finish in here. My voice was even. As of 3 o'clock this afternoon, the Hargrove Development Group has been removed from the Clarksville Bridge project. Performance documentation has been filed with the state. Garrett, you drafted Hargrove's subcontractor agreement. You'll want to get ahead of that conversation with your client. Garrett's face went white. Additionally, I said, Bain Structural has ended its facilities management contracts with Riverfront Properties, LLC. Prescott, I understand you're an equity partner there. They'll need to find new vendors for both Nashville buildings within 30 days. I've provided them with professional referrals, so the transition should be manageable. Prescott's face had gone from red to a color I didn't have a name for. Boyd Richter put down his fork. My home on Maryville Road, I said, was placed in an irrevocable trust on Thursday morning. Melissa is the named beneficiary. It goes to her when I die, not before, and not through any voluntary transfer agreement drafted by her husband's law partner. She will receive it when the time is right and not one day sooner because someone decided I was furniture to be relocated. The room was completely still. Constance found her voice first. You doing this because we were trying to help you. You were trying to help you. You were trying to help yourselves. You are welcome to disagree with me, but not in front of 40 people who just applauded my removal from my own home. Melissa was crying. Not loudly, just tears running straight down her face. I looked at her for a long moment. Not with anger. I want to be clear about that. I looked at my daughter the way you look at someone you love who has gotten genuinely lost. I'm going home, I said. Mel, call me when you want to talk. Not through Garrett, you and me. I drove home in the Silverado, sat on the back porch in the January cold with a blanket and a cup of coffee, and watched the bare trees at the edge of the property move in the wind. My wife Lorraine had planted 3 of those trees. Oaks. They take 40 years to get where those are now. She died of a stroke in 2018, and I had never once considered selling this land because selling it would be like selling the last place she was fully herself. That was what they'd wanted to take. Not just the acreage. Lorraine's oaks. Melissa called the next morning at 7:45. No Garrett on the line. Just her. Dad, I need to say something and I need you to just let me say it. Go ahead. I knew it was wrong. Not the business stuff. I genuinely didn't know any of that, I swear. But the way we were handling it, the way Garrett talked about it at home, like it was a transaction to be managed. I knew it felt wrong, and I let him talk me into it anyway, and I'm sorry. I'm really sorry, Dad. I listened. I didn't know about the company. I didn't know, but I should have asked. I should have asked years ago what your life actually looked like instead of letting Garrett fill in the blanks. That was wrong of me. Yes, I said. It was. She went quiet. Your mother used to say that assumption is the cheapest form of cruelty because it costs nothing to correct and people choose not to. I let that sit. You have a chance to correct it. I want to. I don't know how. Start by coming to see me alone. Leave Garrett home. come sit on the porch and ask me about my week. She came that Saturday. No Garrett, no Constance, no agenda. She brought her daughter Vivi, 7 years old, who spent the visit helping me stack firewood and asking questions about why trees have bark. We had soup from a recipe Lorraine left in her handwriting in a notebook in the kitchen drawer. Melissa found it while she was looking for a ladle and sat down right there on the floor and read the whole thing. The weeks that followed weren't simple. Garrett's professional situation became complicated fast. The Hargrove subcontract removal triggered a state audit of the Clarksville project timeline, and Hargrove filed an internal complaint naming Walsh and Dunmore as having advised them to accept terms that created performance exposure. Garrett didn't lose his partnership, but he spent 3 months in damage control. He lost 2 clients who decided they didn't want to be adjacent to the noise. Prescott called me once, just once. He said he owed me an apology, and he wasn't sure he was capable of giving a good one, but he wanted to try. I appreciated that. I didn't invite him over, but I appreciated it. Constance did not call. 2 months after the dinner, Melissa and Garrett came to see me together. No Prescott. No Constance. Garrett looked like a man who had learned something expensive and was still calculating the full cost. I owe you more than an apology, he said, sitting on my couch that he'd once assessed for demolition. I made assumptions about you, and I built a whole plan around them, and I dressed it up as concern when it was really about what I wanted. That was wrong. And the way I talked about you. He stopped. Melissa told me some of the things I'd said when I thought you couldn't hear. I'm ashamed of that. I let the silence run. What do you want from me? I asked eventually. Not unkindly. Just honestly. Nothing, he said. I don't want anything from you. I want to know if there's a version of this where you're still Vivi's grandfather and we're still family. There's always been that version, I said. You just needed to stop selling something long enough to see it. He nodded, looked at his hands. Garrett, I said, what do you actually know about infrastructure engineering? He looked up. Basically nothing. Come to the office in Knoxville on Tuesday. I'm not offering you anything. I'm not handing you anything. But if you want to understand what I built, you should see it. Might give you a different framework for how you think about value. He came. He spent 4 hours walking job sites with my project managers, asking questions, mostly listening. He didn't say much on the way home. But Melissa told me later he'd come back quiet in a way she hadn't seen before. Not defeated, she said, but recalibrated. Like something had been measured and found genuinely large. My operations director, Winifred, asked me the following week whether I was going to restore the Riverfront Properties contract. I told her no, not because I was still angry, I wasn't particularly, but because the decision had been right on its own terms and I don't reverse right decisions to make people comfortable. Some Sundays now Melissa comes with the kids. Garrett comes about half the time. He's been quieter around me since Knoxville. More careful with his words, more willing to listen. I don't know yet what kind of man he's becoming. I know what kind of man he's becoming. I know what kind he was. That's more information than most people get about the people in their lives. Last month, Vivi asked me why I drive an old truck when Mommy says I'm very rich. I told her the truck knows the roads I took to get where I am, and I don't think it's right to forget the roads. She thought about that for a moment, stirring her hot chocolate. I think the truck is cool, she said. I think so too. The oaks Lorraine planted are bare right now. In April they'll come back the way they always do, thick and unhurried, the way things grow when no one is rushing them toward a transaction. I'll sit on this porch and watch them the way I've watched them every spring for 26 years. And I'll think about the distance between what something looks like and what it actually is, and how much damage gets done in that space by people who never bothered to ask.